Why do you feel that quiet strangeness of not really knowing who you are? Why does it seem like you're always watching life from a distance, even when surrounded by people? The answer is simpler and more radical than you might think. There's a single false idea, planted in you since the earliest years of your life, that sustains practically every existential discomfort you carry into adulthood. This idea creates loneliness. It creates that tightness in your chest before you fall asleep. It creates the fear of the end. But those aren't the only effects. It contaminates your relationships, your work, and even the way you're breathing right now without realizing it. And the philosopher Alan Watts spent his entire life showing that simply seeing this single idea clearly is enough for it to start dissolving on its own. What you're about to hear may change the way you look at everything, including yourself in the mirror tomorrow. This false idea has a name. The philosopher Alan Watts wrote, back in 1966, in a book called The Book on the Taboo Against Knowing Who You Are, that the sensation of being an isolated self inside your own body is the greatest shared mirage of Western civilization. Watts said this illusion is so deep, so rooted, so repeated since the cradle, that we don't even notice we're being deceived. We think this is simply how reality is, as if it were the only possible way to exist. I know this is hard to hear, but pay attention to the following exercise, because it reveals the invisible root of almost all modern existential suffering. Notice this for a moment. When you think about yourself, where do you locate yourself? Most people, when they do this exercise honestly, feel like they're somewhere behind their eyes, inside their head, looking out through two little windows, as if there were a small driver in there, steering the body, observing the world, separated from everything on the other side of the skin. A spectator locked inside a command cabin, receiving information from the outside world through 5 limited senses. And that image of the driver locked inside the skull is so familiar to you it seems obvious. But stop for a second and ask yourself this. If there's a driver inside there observing the world through the windows of the eyes, who's observing the driver? Where does that other observer live? The question seems childish, but it's exactly that question that unlocks the door. Watts called this image the skin-encapsulated ego, and he said something deeply unsettling about it. He said this is not the truth of what you are. It's just a story you've been told so many times that it became reality for you. And this story, seemingly harmless, is the root of nearly all the existential suffering modern human beings carry in their chests. Think about that. A story. Not a biological truth. Not a law of physics. An inherited story. I completely understand that this might sound strange at first. We've spent so much time inside this story that we can no longer distinguish where it ends and where reality begins. But that's exactly the point Watts wanted to expose. Think with me for a moment. If you're a separate self, encapsulated, isolated inside your body, then everything outside of you is potentially a threat. Other people become competitors for the finite resources of existence. The world becomes a battlefield where you have to fight every day to claim your space. Nature becomes a resource to be dominated and exploited. Time becomes a silent enemy that's always running out. And the end becomes the deepest possible fear, because it means the absolute disappearance of that little driver you think you are. That's where the anxiety burning in the stomachs of so many adult men is born when the alarm goes off in the morning. That's where that feeling comes from. The feeling that you have to be running all the time, proving something, achieving something, being somebody. Because if you're just a small self in a giant, indifferent universe, then it makes total sense to feel afraid. It makes total sense to feel lonely. It makes total sense to feel like a stranger passing through a world that didn't ask you to be here. Notice the small pieces of evidence for this in your daily life. That subtle tension when you wake up, even before the first clear thought. The unexplainable urge to grab your phone in the first seconds of the day. The silent rush in the shower. The road rage that seems disproportionate to the actual cause. The strange exhaustion when you get home, even on days when, objectively, nothing particularly difficult happened. Watts said this existential fatigue doesn't come from what you do. It comes from the position you take in relation to life. The position of someone who has to constantly defend a small territory called me against the constant invasion of the outside world. And the more modern society offers you tools to strengthen this separate self, the heavier the self becomes to carry. Productivity courses, personal branding techniques, engagement metrics, increasingly inflated resumes, all of that seems to help, but deep down it only deepens the original wound. Because the wound isn't a lack of self-affirmation. The wound is the belief in being that separate self in the first place. But what if this whole premise is wrong? What if the way you define yourself is the philosophical equivalent of trying to understand the ocean by observing a single drop of water? Watts loved an image I want you to visualize right now with full attention. Picture a wave in the middle of the open sea. It has its own shape, its own height, direction, speed, and foam at the crest. For a few seconds, it seems to exist as a separate thing, with its own identity, traveling across the surface of the water. If the wave had human consciousness, it would probably tell itself, I am this wave, and the ocean is out there, beneath me, around me. I was born at some point, I travel for a while, and soon I'll disappear. But anyone watching from a distance knows the obvious truth. The wave isn't in the ocean. The wave is the ocean rising up for an instant. Without the ocean, there's no wave at all. The wave has no substance of its own, no separate matter, nothing that belongs exclusively to it. It's a temporary form the ocean takes, plays at being, and then dissolves back into the rest of the water. The wave was never separate from anything. It was always the ocean itself, simply manifesting momentarily in that specific curve. Notice how this metaphor dismantles all the anxiety of the imaginary wave. If the wave thought it was separate, it would be afraid of reaching the shore and breaking. It would see its end approaching with every yard traveled. It might try to slow down, pull back, avoid the coast. But the moment the wave realizes it is the ocean, the fear disappears. Because reaching the shore isn't disappearing, it's just changing form. The ocean continues. The wave simply gives back its foam, and the same ocean lifts up another wave somewhere else. An instant later. Now apply this metaphor to yourself slowly. Watts said, you are exactly like that wave. You think you're a separate self, living your individual story, fighting for your small space in the world, but you're not in the universe. You are the universe, rising up temporarily as you, without the entire universe functioning at the same time, without the sun burning 93 million miles away, without gravity holding your feet to the ground, without the oxygen in the atmosphere, without the billions of bacteria living inside your gut, you wouldn't exist for even a second. And when your body dissolves, the universe will keep manifesting in other forms, just as it has for billions of years before you were born. I completely understand it when you feel this sounds like poetry that's too beautiful to be literally true. But pay attention to what modern science has been confirming for decades in serious laboratories with precise instruments. Your body, in this very instant as you hear this sentence, is exchanging atoms with the air you breathe, with the food you ate today, with the water you drank this morning. The cells that make up your skin today weren't yours 7 years ago. The atoms building your brain came from the soil, from plants, from animals that ate those plants, from stars that exploded billions of years ago, long before Earth even existed. The iron flowing through your blood right now was forged inside a giant star that fell apart before the solar system formed. The calcium in your bones is the same calcium found in the limestone of the mountains you see on the horizon. The carbon that structures every one of your thoughts is the same carbon that forms the expensive diamond in the jewelry store window and the cheap graphite of the pencil on the table. You're not a separate thing that came from somewhere else into the world, like some tourist soul renting a body for a few decades. You are the world organizing itself temporarily into this specific form that signs your name on your ID card. Watts loved this convergence between ancient traditions and modern discovery. He spent his whole life showing that what Eastern tradition has known for millennia, 20th century physics, was rediscovering by a completely different path. And the name of the tradition he translated so much for the West is Vedanta, one of the oldest and most sophisticated philosophical currents in India, with roots in texts that date back more than 3,000 years. The founding texts of this tradition are called the Upanishads, written between 800 and 400 years before Christ, long before any of the Western philosophy we usually study in schools. And in them appears a formula that crossed the centuries and reached Watts. The formula is simple and devastating at the same time. Tat Tvam Asi, which means, in Sanskrit, thou art that. Not in any vague sense, in the literal sense. That ultimate thing, the foundation of everything that exists, the essence behind every manifestation, that is exactly what you are. Let that idea sink in. It's completely natural to feel resistance here. The rational mind trained by the West automatically reacts to this kind of statement as if it were delusion. But Watts had a ready response to that reaction, and we'll get to it in a few minutes. The central intuition of Vedanta is simple and radical at the same time. There is one single reality, one single consciousness that manifests itself in billions of different points of view. Not in the vague sense of shallow spirituality that floats around social media. In a literal, investigable sense. Through your eyes, in this specific moment, the universe is observing itself. Through your breath, the universe is breathing. Through your thinking, the universe is thinking itself. Through your doubt, the universe is doubting itself. Watts said every human being is like a little hole the universe opens in itself to take a peek at who it is. Picture that for a moment. 7 billion people alive right now. 7 billion distinct points of view, each one thinking it's a separate thing, when in reality there's 7 billion windows of the same reality observing itself from different angles. And adding all the animals, all the plants, all the insects, maybe even atoms in motion, it's an infinite network of consciousness experiencing itself in everything that exists. And this is where he would drop the line that changes everything for those who really get it. Watts wrote that you are not a stranger in this world. You are something the universe is doing, not something that came into the universe from outside, not something placed here by an external force to fulfill some specific task. No, you are the universe itself, in motion, manifesting now, in this body, with this face, living this specific and unique life that no one else in the entire cosmos is living the same way. Let that sentence land in your chest for a second. Because it's not a pretty quote to post on social media or print on a decorative wall plaque. It's a literal description of what's happening, according to the most sophisticated philosophical tradition humanity has ever produced, and according to what contemporary science has been confirming through completely independent paths. You are the universe experiencing itself as this. As that guy watching this video right now. As that person with that name, with those specific memories, with those particular problems, with those dreams that are yours alone. The universe spent 13,800,000,000 years organizing itself to arrive at this specific arrangement of matter that produces your consciousness in this exact second. You're not an accident along the way. You're not an intruder who snuck into the party. You are one of the infinite forms the universe found to exist and to experience itself from the inside. But then an inevitable question arises that may already be hitting your mind. If I am the entire universe, why don't I feel that way? Why do I feel small, limited, separate, afraid of the credit card bill, rushing to be on time for work, exhausted at the end of the day? Why don't I wake up every morning with the absolute, luminous certainty of being everything that exists? Watts answered this question using a very ancient Sanskrit concept called lila. Lila is a word that means more or less, divine play, or cosmic game, or spontaneous dance of existence. The intuition is this. The universe doesn't have a serious purpose. In the moral or utilitarian sense, we tend to attach to things. The universe manifests itself out of pure play, the way someone plays at imagining worlds in the backyard, the way music simply happens without needing to prove anything, the way a dance unfolds for the joy of the movement itself. Not to arrive at any specific place, just for the pleasure of the manifestation itself. And every good game needs clear rules. Every good game needs genuine mystery. Every good game needs a partial forgetting. Imagine playing chess knowing in advance every move your opponent will make for the next 20 turns. The game would lose its appeal immediately, in that very second. Imagine watching a movie knowing the ending from the beginning, with every twist anticipated. The experience would be hollow, empty, flavorless. Watts said the universe, when it manifests itself as you, has to temporarily forget that it's everything. It has to convincingly pretend to be a small, isolated thing, with its own story, with specific problems, with a date of birth marked on a certificate. Because if you woke up every day with the absolute, full consciousness of being the entire universe, no game would be possible. There would be no discovery. There would be no unique, unrepeatable experience of being exactly who you are, with that specific biography, with those specific affections, with those specific stumbles. You forget so you can rediscover yourself. And that rediscovery, always partial, always fragile, always challenging, is in itself the most interesting part of the cosmic game. Every time someone, somewhere in the world, has that sudden moment of recognizing the underlying unity of things, it's the universe discovering itself again, through a different window, in a different language, in a different body. Think about anyone deeply absorbed in a good piece of fiction, a gamer focused on a complex video game, an actor on stage who has forgotten the audience, a reader who has lost track of time inside a novel. The immersion only works because the person dives in completely. If they remembered the whole time it was just a performance, the spell would break immediately. The magic lies precisely in the ability to momentarily forget that it's pretend. Watts said human life works the same way. The universe is the eternal player who invented a game called existence. The rules include having a limited body, forgetting that you are everything, feeling fear, feeling joy, encountering other forms of yourself thinking they're strangers. The rules include leaving the body one day. The rules include having a personal story with an apparent beginning, middle, and end. Without those rules, there would be no game. And without the game, there would be no infinite richness of experiences that existence produces every second. And here we come to one of the most subtle and beautiful points in Watts's philosophy. He said that, if you really understand this, you realize your life is not a problem to be solved. Your life is a melody to be played. You don't need to arrive anywhere specific for it to have value. Like a symphony that doesn't need to rush to the final measure to justify the existence of the first ones. The meaning is in the happening itself, not in some hypothetical future destination. Think about how many times in your life you've felt afraid of the end. How many nights you've woken up in the middle of the early morning hours with that sharp feeling that everything will one day come to an end, that this little driver behind the eyes will one day dissolve, that everything you've accumulated, lived, loved, and built with so much effort will turn into indistinguishable dust within a few decades. That fear is the oldest one human beings have, and it's born directly from the illusion of separation we've been deconstructing in this video. Watts said something almost scandalous in how simple and direct it is. He said that the fear of the end is the fear of losing something you never had on your own. Life has never been your personal property. You are life's. The wave doesn't disappear when it dissolves into the ocean. The wave goes back to being ocean. It always was ocean. It just played at being a wave for a few seconds before returning to the condition that was always its true essence. When your body transforms, and it will transform, because everything that has form one day changes form, the universe will continue. The atoms of your body will become moist soil, become a plant, become another animal, become another person who might be born 200 years from now on the other side of the planet, become a star again, a few billion years from now, when this planet is swallowed by the sun. The consciousness pulsing in you right now, according to ancient Vedanta, was never locked inside your skull. It pulses in every existing form, and it will keep pulsing in other forms after this one. Specifically, ceases to exist as an organized configuration. There's a sentence Watts repeated in recorded lectures that still circulates today. He said the end is not the opposite of life. It's the opposite of birth. Life has no opposite, because life is the backdrop where birth and dissolution happen as two sides of the same coin. To be born is the universe temporarily concentrating into a form. To leave the body is the universe redistributing that form back. Life itself, that permanent flow that sustains everything, never begins and never ends. It just manifests in successive waves that take on faces and biographies, and then dissolve. Think about the billions of people who lived before you. Each of them thought, at some point, that they were the center of the world. Each one had their private fears, their passions, their anxieties about the future, and every single one, without exception, dissolved. But the universe continued, and here you are now, asking the same questions they asked, feeling the same fears. Not because you're special, and not because you're disposable, but because you are simply the current manifestation of a movement that has been happening since existence has existed. And maybe here is the deepest liberation Watts offered. Not liberation from the fact that you'll have to dissolve one day, because you will, but liberation from the weight of thinking your passing is a unique cosmic drama. Your dissolution is as natural as the sunset, as natural as a leaf falling from a tree in autumn. And precisely because it's natural, it loses much of the horror modern culture projects onto it. I'm not saying this to make you uneasy, but to wake you up once and for all. You've spent your whole life trying to protect a specific wave, thinking it was the only thing that existed of you. But your deepest essence was never that wave. Your essence was always the ocean. And the ocean has absolutely nothing to fear, because it simply is everything that can happen. But I know that right now, strong resistance might be coming up in you. Maybe you're thinking, this is all very beautiful, even comforting, but isn't it just a philosophical story to feel better in the face of the finitude of real life? Isn't it some elaborate escape from confronting the harshness of daily life? The bills, the relationships, the frustrations? Watts anticipated this objection and answered it with calm firmness. He said that recognizing this truth doesn't take away your responsibility. And it doesn't turn you into some checked-out contemplative lost in metaphysical clouds. On the contrary, it frees you from the crushing weight of carrying your entire life alone on your shoulders. You keep working, you keep choosing, you keep loving, you keep stumbling, you keep learning new things. But without the constant tension of having to be somebody specific, without the blind urgency to prove something to the world, without the overwhelming sense that everything depends exclusively on the heroic effort of your tiny encapsulated self. On the contrary, when you recognize that you're the universe manifesting itself, your action in the world takes on a different quality. Lighter, more precise, more natural, more whole. Like the experienced basketball player who stops thinking about individual movements and just plays. Like the veteran musician who stops calculating each note and just plays. You act from a deeper place than the tension of an ego that has to assert itself every minute. Before we continue with this reflection, let me tell you something important. If you're enjoying this content, check out our exclusive ebook, Alchemy and Archetypes, in the first comment. There's some really deep material in there that goes deeper into a lot of what we're talking about right now, especially how these universal symbols cross different traditions and reach your practical life today. In the 21st century, in the middle of your everyday decisions, back to what matters. What changes in your concrete life when this perception really starts to settle in? A lot, and nothing flashy. The changes are quiet and deep. They grow like an underground root without making any noise. Relationships start to stop being transactional. When you look at another person and realize they're also the universe manifesting itself, they stop being just a means to an end you want to reach. They become a genuine encounter. You're not silently negotiating with them in your head. You're participating, alongside them, in the same cosmic game, in two different forms, that decided, for some mysterious reason, to cross paths in this specific life. Intimacy changes in quality. Long, late-night conversations with old friends change in quality. Because that subtle layer of utilitarianism that poisons modern human relationships disappears. You're no longer constantly looking for what you can get from others. You're simply meeting the universe in various forms, each one with its own flavor. Picture a father sitting on the living room floor playing with his young daughter after an exhausting day. Before, he might have been mentally split, calculating what he still needs to do, rolling work worries around, feeling guilty for not being fully present. When the perception we're discussing settles in, even partially, that same father feels that the small life there on the floor is the universe manifesting itself in a curious and recent form, and that he, sitting on the rug, is the universe manifesting itself in an adult and tired form. The two are the same thing meeting itself. There's no task in that scene. There's just life being life. Work stops being pure performance or a daily fight for symbolic survival. You still put in the effort. You still want to do well at what you do. You still pursue professional growth. But that gray urgency of having to prove something to someone invisible inside your head disappears. Maybe an absent father, maybe an abstract society, maybe an earlier version of yourself that still demands approval. You produce, because producing is one of the ways this specific wave found to express itself in the world. Not because you have to demonstrate that you deserve to exist among others. Notice how this lifts a huge weight off your shoulders. Most men carry, more or less consciously, the feeling that they have to justify their own existence daily through production, achievement, status, accumulated money. This structural logic is one of the deepest sources of chronic exhaustion in the modern world. And it dissolves when you recognize, even partially, that your existence doesn't need to be justified. It already is, in itself, a manifestation of the existence of the entire universe. Your existence doesn't need to be justified. It is already, in itself, justified by the very fact that it is happening. It makes total sense if you're still skeptical about this. The whole culture we grew up in trains the opposite from the earliest years. You were taught to prove your worth, to stand out, to compete. Reversing that conditioning doesn't happen with the snap of a finger. But it begins right now, with this pause, and loneliness changes in flavor completely. This is maybe the most delicate and most transformative point of this entire reflection, because when you recognize that you've never really been alone, that every atom of your body is part of the same network that moves everything that exists, that every breath is the universe breathing in you, loneliness doesn't simply disappear. It transforms into something different. It becomes an inhabited stillness, a quiet intimacy with all of existence. You can be sitting alone in a room at 3 a.m. and feel, in an almost imperceptible but real way, that you're part of something bigger that has always included you, since before you were born. Pathological loneliness is born from the belief in being separate. Contemplative and fertile solitude is born from recognizing that even in the absence of other human bodies, you continue to participate in an infinite web of relationships that make up the very fabric of the real. It's not a comforting idea. It's a perception that deepens over time and with sustained attention. It's completely valid to feel some distrust about all of this at first. Watts didn't ask anyone for blind faith. He asked for honest, rigorous investigation. He said, "Don't believe me just because I speak nicely. Look inside with patience. Notice what shows up when you stop automatically assuming, out of mental habit, that you are a separate self. Notice what's left when you suspend, even for a few seconds in a pause during the day, the entire story of who you think you are." And then comes a curious thing that deserves attention. Watts ended many of his lectures with a particular kind of laugh. Not as mockery, not as cheap stage comedy. It was a quiet laugh, almost shy, like someone who'd noticed a cosmic joke that took a lifetime to truly understand in depth. He said the only possible human reaction, when you really get it, is to laugh. Not laugh at the world or at others. Laugh with yourself, for having spent so much time frantically searching for yourself, thinking you were lost somewhere, when the thing being searched for was exactly the searcher. Picture the scene calmly. You spend decades trying to find your definitive place in the universe. You read dense books, you go to therapy for years, you travel to faraway places, you seek out Eastern masters, you try meditation practices, you achieve material things, you lose important things, you start over, you give up, you start over again. And one day, maybe by chance, maybe while listening to an old recorded lecture from an Englishman with a calm voice who left his body in 1973 in a houseboat in Sausalito, California, you realize you were looking for yourself the whole time while you were the very thing you were looking for. How can you not laugh at that, honestly? How can you not laugh, with lightness and tenderness, at the absurd and perfect game this universe has been playing in you since the day you were born? It's the most elegant joke ever told. And it only works because you believed in it with so much conviction for so long. This laugh of Watts's isn't a mocking laugh. It's a laugh of recognition. Like the laugh of someone who comes home after a long trip and realizes they were looking for exactly what they always had. It's a compassionate laugh, including toward yourself. Because you weren't stupid for believing in the illusion. You were human. And being human is, by definition, diving deeply into this experience of being separate for a few decades, before maybe, at some moment in life, subtly noticing that the separation was never real. But it's important to make one thing absolutely clear here to avoid common misunderstandings. You don't need to become a Tibetan monk, abandon everything, move to faraway mountains, shave your head, and wear an orange robe to access this perception. Watts was radically against that spiritual caricature. He said, in documented lectures, that realization is not a special state reserved for enlightened saints. It's a simple, available recognition that can happen while you're washing the dishes after dinner, while you're driving in Monday morning traffic, while you're changing your kid's diaper at 2 a.m, while you're turning off the light to go to sleep after a long day. You just have to remember at the right moments. Remember when anxiety squeezes your stomach and you feel too small to handle life. Remember when sadness shows up out of nowhere on a Sunday afternoon and you feel that old loneliness of being isolated in a giant, indifferent world. Remember when fear of the future paralyzes you and you think you're not going to be enough to face what's coming. Remember that you are already exactly what you're looking for. That the thing you think is missing is exactly what you are in essence, even now, even without clearly realizing it. You don't need to do anything else complicated. Just remember at the crucial moments, and that remembering, when it becomes a subtle habit, slowly dissolves the chronic tension that holds up the illusion of the separate ego. Some people develop simple practices to help with this remembering. Sitting in silence for 5 minutes before starting the day, looking out the window with no agenda at all. Walking without your phone for a whole block. Paying attention to the weight of your body on the ground. Drinking the first glass of water in the morning, slowly feeling it go down. Watts wasn't against these practices, but he warned about a danger. When they become a mandatory technique, they become just one more task for the separate self trying to improve itself. The intention always has to be remembering what has always been, not building something new. Remembering doesn't take effort. It just takes a pause and attention. And maybe the most beautiful part of all this is realizing that this perception doesn't arrive all at once, like a lightning strike. It arrives in small glimpses over time. A sunset that stops you in your tracks for a few seconds. An unexpected hug that reminds you of something you didn't know you'd forgotten. A comfortable silence with someone you love. An old song that comes on the car radio and transports you. These are the little cracks the universe opens in you, giving back, in bearable doses, the memory of what you've always been. Watts liked one final image, and I'll leave you with it to close this reflection. He said the universe spent 13,800,000,000 years preparing to be you, exactly as you are, in this moment. Every star that exploded in a distant galaxy, every species that slowly evolved, every one of your ancestors who survived long enough to have a child, every improbable encounter between your grandparents, conspired so that this specific configuration of matter, with this face and this singular story, would be here right now, perceiving what it's perceiving in this second. You are no less cosmic than a star. You are as ancient as the universe, because the matter that forms you is exactly that. You are not an accident, and you are not a stranger in this world. You are the universe experiencing itself as this. Recognizing this, even for just a few seconds in the middle of a chaotic day, already changes everything quietly. Not because you suddenly understand all of life, but because you stop carrying it alone like it's some personal cross. Because you realize you were always sustained by the same thing you were trying to sustain with so much effort. This is Watts's cosmic game, and it's already being played in you, right now, in this exact instant as you hear these final words. You have never been outside of it. If these reflections make sense to you, consider becoming part of our members club. See you in the next video.